everyone, and welcome to our live stream today about Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. It is her 95th birthday today, and to celebrate, we are going to be looking back over her very historic life. First off, though, I would like to tell you about a raffle. Today, we are starting our raffle for this British-themed collection of teas. To enter the raffle, you must donate at least $5 using the link below. The more you donate, the more chances you have to win. We will divide whatever amount that you give us by 5, and that will be as many chances that you have to win. These donations go towards our monthly donation goal, which help us to continue providing free public history programs to you, our fantastic public. You can enter until Sunday, April 25th. The winner will be announced on Monday, April 26th. And these are super cute little tea tins that are full of English breakfast tea, Earl Grey tea, and English afternoon tea. So be sure to enter to win those. All right, so let us begin at the beginning of Queen Elizabeth's life. She was born on April 21st, 1926, and she was given the name Elizabeth Alexandria Mary, the first child of the Duke and Duchess of York, who are pictured there to the side. When she was born, it was never expected that she would be queen. As she was born to the Duke and Duchess of York, the Duke of York was second in line to the throne. He had an older brother that everyone expected to be king, and then to have children who would then continue the line of the House of Windsor. So when Elizabeth was born, it was never expected that she would be queen. Of course, she was a member of the royal family with all of the rights and privileges therefore appertaining, but she never thought she was going to be queen, nor did her sister, Margaret Rose, who is then born after her younger sister, that's her only other sibling, would be second in line to the throne. It was only after the abdication crisis in 1936 that Queen Elizabeth began to realize, well, she would be queen. At this time, she was 10 years old. So for the first 10 years of her life, she never expected to end up being the queen of Britain and all of their other territories. So the abdication crisis is really a fundamental part in Elizabeth's life. It changes her life forever. And that is when her uncle, King/Emperor Edward VIII, proposed to marry Wallis Simpson. Now, Wallis Simpson was an American divorcee. She had already been divorced once. She was in the process of divorcing her second husband when Edward decided that he would like to marry her. So she was technically still a married woman. Technically, of course, she is in the process of getting a divorce. So because she is a divorcee, because she is an American, the British people do not like her. There are religious, legal, political, and moral objections raised to this union. And there is such a public outcry that Edward doesn't know what to do necessarily. He can't be with the woman that he loves, Wallis Simpson, and still be king. He can't be king without Wallis Simpson by his side. So he has to pick one. He has to pick love or the throne. Because in England, the monarch, the king or queen, is head of the Church of England. And the Church of England at this time did not allow divorced people to remarry while their significant other that they had divorced was still alive. It would have been a religious conflict and a moral conflict for Edward to marry Wallis Simpson and be head of the Church of England and king, because those two go together. And then, of course, the public doesn't want her to be their queen consort. So, which one is it going to be? Edward ended up choosing love. He decided to abdicate, give up his right to the throne, and marry Wallis Simpson. This is, of course, after the death of his father, which was also in 1936. That's when he became king. He was never coronated, so usually the coronation happens the year after the death of the monarch. Of course, the next in line is acting as monarch through that entire time, but to have enough time to prepare the ceremony, to have the respectable time of mourning for the former monarch, the whole coronation celebration only happens a year after the actual death and ascension of the current monarch. So he is actually never crowned king, but he is king in title, as he was king on the death upon his father. But within that year, he abdicated and was then succeeded by his brother, Albert. Now, Albert decided to choose the kingly name, one of his middle names, George. So he is known as King George VI. And then you have, of course, Queen Elizabeth, his wife, being his queen consort, and they are crowned on May 12th, 1937. At this time, Elizabeth becomes heir presumptive. Sometimes you might hear the words heir apparent, but at this time, Elizabeth, well, she is a girl. And her parents are still young. They might have another child. And if that child happens to be a boy, well then, even though it's her younger brother, the boy would be favored in the line of succession before her, because it favors male lineage. Therefore, she is heir presumptive, not heir apparent, because if she were to have a little brother, he would supersede her. Of course, King George and Queen Elizabeth do not have any more children. They just have Elizabeth and Margaret Rose, which King George refers to as my pride and joy, Elizabeth being his pride and Margaret Rose being his joy. It's a very famous quote from King George. And as she is now heir presumptive, she was educated privately at home with her sister, Margaret Rose, with a governess, and she was also tutored by one of the tutors at Eton College, which is predominantly, and I believe still, a male-only institution for young boys. It's a college preparatory school and boarding school. But she was tutored privately by one of the professors at Eton to learn about the Constitution and the inner workings of the British government. Another very large event that very much shapes Queen Elizabeth's life is World War II. In September of 1939, Britain entered World War II as they were fighting against Nazi Germany and allied themselves with France. They were also fighting against other Axis powers such as Italy and technically Japan. Of course, Britain is going to be fighting mostly with Germany in the Battle of Britain, which is going to take place. You have the Battle of Britain, and then you also have the Blitz, which goes on for 8 months and is very devastating to England, especially London and other selected larger city targets. And it's during this time that Elizabeth really starts to step onto a public stage, to step into her public role. She is coming of age at this time. Of course, the war is going on for most of the end of her childhood, the beginning of her teen years, and into her adult life is really shaped by World War II. And it's in 1940 that Elizabeth made her first radio broadcast during the BBC's Children Hour with her sister Margaret Rose. And in this radio broadcast, it's very endearing and important because she's stepping into this role of being a public person. It's her first big speech, and she's giving it to other children. Because during this time, you have the London Blitz. Germany is bombing, especially London and larger cities. But of course, London being the largest city, it's one of the largest targets and most hit targets. And she's talking to other children who are experiencing really the same fears that she and her sister are experiencing about, well, German bombs going off in their city. And she's talking to the kids about just really what's going on, why we have to do our duty, that it's all going to be okay, that all is going to be well. Because at this time, it was a large operation to begin moving children out of the city and into the countryside to keep them safe. And one of the most famous, probably literary instances of this is in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. That's how the children in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe get to the wardrobe out in the English countryside. It's because it's during World War II. Children are being evacuated from their families and taken to just the countryside, where they might live with someone they know, they might live with someone they kind of know, or maybe they don't know at all. Just like the children in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Some of them explore parts of the houses and end up in magical lands, apparently, according to C.S. Lewis's novel. But that's who Elizabeth is talking to at this point, and it was very well received by the public, and it was really her stepping out onto the world stage as being a monarch and a leader. Then in 1943, Elizabeth undertook her first solo public appearance to visit the Grenadier Guards. And in February of 1945, she was appointed as the honorary second subaltern in the Auxiliary Territorial Services, which is at the time the name for the British female branch of the British Army. And there she trained as a driver and a mechanic. There she is pictured with a vehicle in which she knows how to drive and to fix if anything happens. And that's the year that she turns 18, in which she is eligible for military service. And she is going to serve her country in this way and serve in World War II. And therefore she is a World War II veteran. She's very proud of her military service and also proud of being able to drive and fix the car. And I think that's something that she and Prince Philip had enjoyed, was driving different types of cars. After World War II, Princess Elizabeth then goes on her first overseas tour in 1947 to Southern Africa. During the tour, she made the following pledge: "I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong." This tour was a great success. It really, again, it puts her even further out, really into the world, not just onto the world stage, but out into the world, being the royal face, being the royal, really persona of, and being an ambassador for the British royal family. It was not long after that she then gets married to Prince Philip. They met at the Royal Naval College in Dartmouth in 1939. Well, that's really, they've met each other before that a couple of times, but that's really the time where they got together and really fell in love, is during that meeting at the Royal Naval College in Dartmouth, where Philip was. But this match did not come without some controversy. A lot of people did not want her to marry Philip, and that is because he was a prince without a home or a kingdom. He was Prince of Greece and Denmark, but during World War II, Greece was under Nazi rule. His family really had to flee. Then on his Denmark relations were not exactly great either. Some of his sisters married into prominent German families, German nobility, which had Nazi ties, which did not look good, especially in Britain right after World War II ends. And of course, Philip himself served in the Royal British Navy during World War II and was a distinguished World War II veteran, serving the country in which he would become prince of in World War II. But he had some relations that reflected badly, and people were nervous about that and nervous about the public perception of that, and really just were unsettled by it, to say the absolute least. But the engagement was officially announced on July 9th, 1947. Princess Elizabeth really wanted to marry Philip. They were very much in love. They wanted to marry each other. And Elizabeth really didn't let anyone else's opinion or advice stand in her way of marrying who she wanted to and who she loved. And then Elizabeth and Philip were married on the 20th of November 1947 in Westminster Abbey. It was a large public affair. Queen Victoria had really started the big tradition, really, of having a very large royal wedding. And this one, of course, was, again, a very joyous public affair where people came out to the streets to watch and to see the royal couple. And it was a little bit toned down, though, because it was right after the end of World War II. Rationing is still going on in Britain, even though the war has ended. Elizabeth actually had to use ration coupons to get enough fabric for her wedding dress. And some people, they wanted her subjects wanted to make sure that she had a beautiful wedding dress and actually sent her ration coupons to make sure she had enough. But of course, she had enough and did not want to use anyone else's, so she returned them all to their rightful owners. But I think that's a very sweet sentiment on both ends. But that's probably why we see her wedding as being a little bit more reserved, because of the time in which it took place is right after war, right after devastation in London, rationing. So it's still a very royal affair. It's a very grand in the sense of it is stately, but not as extravagant as other royal weddings have been. After their marriage, they started a family, and Elizabeth gave birth to her first child, Prince Charles, on November 14th, 1948. She then gave birth to 3 following children. Princess Anne was born in August of 1950 on the 15th. Prince Andrew was born February 19, 1960, and Prince Edward was born on March 10, 1964. So, the 2 children, Princess Anne and Prince Charles, were born before she took the throne, and then Prince Andrew and Prince Edward were born after she had already ascended to the throne. So, her ascension to the throne. During 1951, her father's health had declined, and in early 1952, Elizabeth and Philip set out for a tour of Australia and New Zealand by way of Kenya. And it was while they were at their place in Kenya that they got news that her father had passed away. And it was Prince Philip who broke the news to her that her father had died and that she was now queen on February 6, 1952. So then came her coronation, a year later, of course. You needed time to plan the coronation and also a respectable time of mourning for her father. She chose to remain Elizabeth. She said, of course, I'll just remain Elizabeth. No need to make a fuss about it. Opposed to other monarchs who then would choose a new name to take on as they were coronated, she just wanted it to be Elizabeth. And therefore she was known as Elizabeth II, which actually caused some controversy because she is the first Elizabeth to rule over Scotland. So therefore she should be Elizabeth I of Scotland and Elizabeth II of England, but that's quite a mouthful. But anyway, thought it was an interesting point in the British Empire of that, because it was right after Queen Elizabeth I that you then have the Scottish king who then comes and has claim to the English throne. So you have James the first of England and 5th of Scotland. And then, of course, they become Great Britain, one nation, under Queen Anne. So I think that's probably why she is just known as Elizabeth II. So she and the Duke of Edinburgh moved to Buckingham Palace being the official royal residence of the English royal family, starting with Queen Victoria. of course, the British royal family has lots and lots of houses and castles in which they enjoy and live at. Windsor would continue to be the name of the royal house. Windsor is also the name of a large castle in which Elizabeth primarily grew up in and also holds a special place in her heart. And she would usually visit Windsor on the weekends. But when doing business during the week, she is at Buckingham Palace. And it's at Buckingham Palace where the new royal family moves into even before the coronation to officially start her journey as monarch. Now, as I said, Windsor would continue to be the name of the royal house, which also is a little bit of a controversy because she is a woman, she is a married woman. Was she going to have, would her husband's name then be the new name of the house of, would it be his house? Would it continue to be her house? It caused some controversy of what exactly is going to happen, but it was decided that Windsor would continue to be the name of the royal house. After her great-grandmother died, Queen Mary, and as well as you have a new prime minister, it was then changed to where the house would be Windsor. So it's the House of Windsor that is in power, but their children could have the hyphenated name Mountbatten Windsor, which would honor then her husband and her. The Duke of Edinburgh was made the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Philip, right before the coronation to bestow that very high title. It was decided, of course, that he was not going to be coronated king because then he would outrank his wife, who is the rightful ruler of Great Britain, and therefore he would be known as Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. The coronation took place on the 2nd of June, 1953. Elizabeth was only 25 years old at the time of her ascension to the throne. And during the service, in which this was the first time that the coronation itself had ever been broadcast to the world. But the anointing of the holy oil and communion are considered so sacred that those were not aired. There was a covering that would go over her during the anointing and the communion, and also the TV went to a different screen. So, but for all intents and purposes, even though it wasn't necessarily it was the entire coronation minus those few moments of anointing communion, but it really invited the world in to see what a coronation actually was. Of course, people knew about a coronation, but they go in without a crown to the church and then they come back out with one. It is kind of what people would know who were in the streets, who gathered. But now you get to look inside, and it was the really a symbol of being a more modern, open monarchy, a more modern monarchy, inviting people in to see exactly what this kind of secretive idea is going of the monarch is really going on. So during the service, Elizabeth took the coronation oath, which she takes incredibly seriously. She was anointed with holy oil, symbolizing her being God's anointed to rule over England. She was then invested with robes and regalia. So during the ceremony, they would place robes upon her, and then was crowned Queen of the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Pakistan, and Ceylon, which is now Sri Lanka. And this brings us to one of the very important roles in Queen Elizabeth's reign, which really, this trend had started before her reign took place. It really began when she was born. So from Elizabeth's birth onwards, the British Empire was transforming from the British Empire to the Commonwealth of Nations. And in 1953, the Queen and her husband embarked right after her coronation on a 7-month tour around the world, touring and visiting 13 countries and covering more than 40,000 miles by land, sea, and air, going on this tour of the Commonwealth of Nations. And it was through the creation of the Commonwealth, the process of decolonization of these territories of the British Empire becoming more independent nations with more equal footing, that they were no longer subject to British rule, that they were ruling themselves, but were part of this larger community of nations, that being the Commonwealth, in which the Queen is head of, ceremoniously, was really taking place under the reign of Queen Elizabeth, especially in the 1960s and the 1970s. This saw the acceleration in decolonization of Africa and the Caribbean. Over 20 countries gained independence from Britain as part of this planned transition to self-government, which she presided over. And in 1961, Queen Elizabeth II planned to go to Ghana, a former British colony that had gained its independence in 1957. But before she left on the trip, which was to take place on the November 9th to 20th, members of Parliament and the public didn't want her to go through with this because of the rising tensions in the country, where the president was well on his way to becoming a dictator and was becoming very friendly with the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Elizabeth insisted on going to Ghana, despite the danger that was involved. And from the moment that Elizabeth arrived in Ghana, along with Prince Philip, she was surrounded by crowds and excitement. Post-independence, the country had embarked on a program of African socialism in an attempt to strengthen its economy after years of colonialism. And a neo-Marxist paper in Ghana actually said of Elizabeth that she was the world's greatest socialist monarch in history, which is an incredibly unusual description for an enormously wealthy hereditary head of state, but it indicates just how popular she was. Elizabeth also captured attention by dancing with the president of Ghana, pictured here, and having the queen and a former colonial subject arm in arm on the dance floor. It really demonstrated her acceptance, and therefore Britain's acceptance, of this new footing, this more equal footing between their countries. And also she was able to kind of reel Ghana back into the Commonwealth instead of it starting to go towards the Soviet Union, which was a great political asset during the Cold War. And this is Elizabeth's dedication to Commonwealth on full display, and this trip really shows what a success that she is at creating this community that is the Commonwealth. And this trip, it not just showed that she was kind of holding this organization together, it also demonstrated how, even as a monarch with very limited powers, she still had a very important role to play on the world stage, being that she does not have any political power dictated to her necessarily, but behind the scenes advising, really being an ambassador for her country, she has a very important role to play around the world and as head of the Commonwealth. Now, in 1977, Elizabeth marked the silver jubilee of her ascension to the throne, which was 25 years on the throne. There were parties and events that took place throughout the Commonwealth, many coinciding with her associated national and Commonwealth tours. So again, she goes on the Commonwealth tour, visiting all of the lands of the Commonwealth. And this celebration really reaffirmed the Queen's popularity. Now, moving on to the 1980s. During the 80s saw some interesting times for the royal family as we come to a even more modern 24-hour news cycle of an age. There was increased media interest in the royal family, and we see this really pick up during the 1980s for various reasons. But it was in 1981, during the Trooping the Colors, that 6 blank shots were fired at the Queen. This was originally seen as an assassination attempt. Of course, the shots were blank, so it wasn't. It was more of a scare tactic. But nonetheless, we see some dissent, some wider growing dissent against the monarchy growing in the 1980s. This is not the only assassination attempt that the Queen has survived, but it is definitely one of the most public. As Trooping the Color ceremony, it is really the official birthday celebration of the monarch. The monarch does not actually celebrate their birthday on their birthday. The monarch actually has a ceremonious birthday in the summer because, well, it's just nicer to hold parades in the summer than in the winter in England. So the monarch actually has an official monarch birthday that all monarchs have, whether or not that was the day they were actually born, and that is the day that they celebrate them. And on that day, you have Trooping the Color, which is a nice big military parade where the Queen goes out, and at some point she has ridden her horse. On other occasions, she has ridden in the carriage. In her older age, she has decided to ride more in the carriage, even though she absolutely adores horses and loves riding. That's one of her passions is she loves horses and she loves dogs, and is very involved with the raising and breeding of both. She loves corgis especially, and during this Trooping the Color, she was indeed riding a horse when the 6 blank shots were fired at her, and it was very much remarked upon her composure and handling of the horse during this supposed attack. Now, another reason why the 1980s saw so much media attention on the royal family is because Prince Charles married Lady Diana Spencer on the 29th of July, 1981. This was, around the world, one of the largest media spectacles that the world had seen, and it was a very, very grand affair in every sense of the word. If you just look at Diana's dress, it is giant. And that's how everything about this occasion was. You have Prince Charles, who is next in line to the throne. One day would be king. You have Lady Diana Spencer, this sweet young girl who is now just being pushed upon to the world stage and into the spotlight of the media, who, looking back on it, did not know necessarily what she was getting into or how to handle all of that attention that was so immediately thrust upon her. And it creates, again, another modernization of the royal family, and lots of change and interest, immediate interest that goes into that. So you have this giant wedding spectacle that also is going on in the 1980s. Also, you have on June 21st, 1982, Prince William of Wales was born. The son of the Prince of Wales, Prince Charles, and Lady Diana Spencer is their first-born son, Prince William, who was then third in line to the throne. So we now have the new generation of heirs to the throne coming about in the 1980s. And of course, everyone loves weddings and babies. Those, of course, generate so much media interest. And it was this intense media interest in the opinions and the private lives of the royal family, especially during the 1980s, which led to a series of sensational stories in the press. The royal family has always been used to attention. They're the royal family. But in the 1980s, we see a shift from just them being public figureheads to more of an interest in who they are as people, which sounds good because it's humanizing the monarchy, but the monarchy is not meant to be humans. They're meant to be the monarchy. They're very official royal title people who do official functions, and they're very limited, and the Queen never gives personal interviews. She doesn't want to share much about her private life. This is my job that I am doing. not this is who I am as a person. And that's the idea of being the crown, the head of state, not a celebrity, is very much something that Queen Elizabeth has stated. She is not a film star, she is a head of state. And that is very much how she goes about her job. And the 1980s, we see flux, not from the Queen, but from other members of the royal family in seeing more of their private life and public opinions and things being thrust into the media. And that has then become one of the things that the royal family has continuously dealt with to this day, and that is sensational stories in the news, which may or may not be true. And that really starts in the 1980s because there is such intense interest in the royal family. There is actually one editor of a British tabloid magazine that says, I don't care if the story is true or not, it will sell. Just as, don't make too much of a splash of it. It should be just, sell magazines for the weekend and then everyone will forget about it by Monday. That's when we really see that start, which I think is an incredibly fascinating thing that the royal family has been dealing with since the 1980s, really, is when it started. We then go into the 1990s, and this is Elizabeth did not have a great start to the 90s. Elizabeth actually calls 1992 her annus horribilis, which is her horrible year. It starts off with reports of affairs and strained marriages among her children. And then in November, a large fire broke out at Windsor Castle, damaging a large amount of the structure. And 3 of her 4 children end up getting a divorce. And some of these are more public than others. The 1980s saw a lot of marriages and happy times for the royal family as babies were born and people got married, and royal weddings always spark a reinterest in the monarchy and this fairy tale dream of a royal wedding. But now in the 90s, we have more of the strife within those marriages and within those families, which is playing out on an incredibly public scene. So most famously is the divorce of Charles and Diana and the death of Princess Diana in 1997, and how the royal family reacted to that, how the Queen reacted to that, and was very much under the public eye when they were having this very intense family drama play out on the world stage, which everyone seemed to be very invested in, or at least a lot of people are invested in, to where tabloids were following Diana, and many people very much blame the tabloids and the paparazzi for causing Diana's death. So, and the Queen also had a very strained relationship with Diana, even, and of course, Diana and Prince Philip had a very strained relationship as well, as Diana also had a strained relationship with her husband, her former husband, Prince Charles. So it's a very hard year for the Queen and the royal family in general. It's a pretty rough decade. But in the November of 1997, the Queen and her husband, Prince Philip, marked their golden wedding anniversary, so closing out the decade on a happier note, celebrating 50 years of marriage. It was in this speech where her toast really, at their golden wedding celebration, to where she says that Prince Philip was her strength and stay throughout all those years. In 2002, Elizabeth marked her golden jubilee, so 50 years on the throne, which is very happy, but also in that same year, 2002, her sister and her mother died in February and in March of 2002, respectively. It was wondered if the Golden Jubilee would go on at all, because that was just taking place in the summer. And it did, and it was still a joyous celebration, but of course, with the death of her mother and sister so close together in 2002, it did put a little bit of a damper on that year. Now, we have the Diamond Jubilee. So in 2012, the Queen marked 60 years on the throne and celebrations were held throughout her realms. She opened the 2012 Summer Olympics and Paralympics in London, making her the first head of state to open 2 Olympic Games in 2 countries. She also had opened one previously in Canada, in which she is head of, is one of the Commonwealth nations, so she is the Queen of Canada as well. Now, on September 9th, 2015, Queen Elizabeth II became the longest reigning English monarch and the longest reigning female monarch in world history. The Queen's Platinum Jubilee is planned for 2022, and in 2024, on May 27th, she would surpass Louis XIV of France as the longest reigning monarch of a sovereign state in verified world history. So long live the Queen. Let's see what happens next. She has had quite the historic life. This is just a very, very brief overview. We have not touched on, there's just so much to talk about when you talk about Queen Elizabeth II, her life and her work, her charitable work, all of these things that she's done around the world. It would take a very, very long time just to name them all. So this is a very brief overview of the life of Queen Elizabeth II. If you have any questions or would like to further expound on a subject, please go ahead and put that in the chat. Also, if you would like to look at the chat, we do have the link to this raffle. So remember, we have this raffle that we are doing for this British-themed selection of teas. This is the Britannic collection, and it has the English breakfast tea, the Earl Grey tea, and the English afternoon tea. Lovely blends in very fun English-inspired containers. To enter the raffle, you must donate at least $5 using the link below. The more you donate, the more chances you have to win. These donations go towards our monthly donation goal, which helps us to continue providing free public history programs to you, our absolutely wonderful, fantastic public. So you can enter until Sunday, April 25th, and the winner will be announced on Monday, April 26th. So be sure to follow us on social media so that you can be reminded or see if you win.
All right. So this is Miss Libba from behind the scenes over here. So if you have any questions for Marie, do put those in the chat, and I will be looking for those. And of course, if you would like to donate toward our monthly donation goal, you can go to bit.ly/April21goal to enter. So someone in, I think this was Laura in the YouTube chat, was wondering, did Edward also have some Nazi connections too? She had the idea that he did. Could you expound upon that?
So Edward, Elizabeth's uncle, also was very friendly with Hitler, had actually met Hitler himself, was very sympathetic to the Nazi cause. This is before World War II starts. So Hitler had been leading Germany for a very large portion of the 1930s, and Edward liked the way that Hitler was running his country. And a lot of people actually admired Germany and the way that Germany had kind of reinvented itself and reinvigorated itself before, after the First World War, in which Germany was very devastated and going through depression. And Hitler kind of reinvigorated the economy, came up with a bunch of new ideas for Germany. And before Germany started World War II and doing a lot of really terrible things before people became aware of Germany doing a lot of terrible things, such as the Holocaust and rounding up people that they found to be undesirable citizens, a lot of people outside of Germany and in Germany itself actually really liked Hitler. And Edward was one of those people. And it's a very interesting question to ask, well, what if Edward had remained king? Would Britain have sided with Germany in World War II? Would would they have signed a peace agreement with Germany after the fall of France? There are very interesting historical questions to ask ourselves, the what ifs. And I think that's one of the very large, fascinating ones in English monarch history is if Edward had remained king, would Britain really still exist as we know it today? Would the monarchy still exist as we know it today? I think those are very interesting what if questions. But yes, Edward very much had affiliations with Nazi Germany, which also reflected bad on the royal family, even though they were very much against Germany and were actively fighting a war against Germany. But Edward was really ostracized from the family after his abdication. They felt like that he had given up and refused to do his duty that he was literally born to do. And there was a rift in the family that never healed after the abdication crisis. And he lived the rest of his life in exile in France with Wallis Simpson. And from all accounts, it seems that they were very happy together and very in love until the end of their lives. They remained married and happily in exile in France. But of course, there was still tension between the British monarchy, the royal family in Britain, and Edward. That really never resolved.
All right, and our next question, or actually this is more of a comment, it's an interesting point of view. So we had the scaled back wedding of Prince Philip and Elizabeth, and Prince Philip's recent funeral was also scaled back, and that's an interesting point to make, given that they married in trying times, and Prince Philip's funeral also took place during more or less trying times. Were there any other times where historic events or worldwide events would challenge the Queen or pose any challenges to her as a monarch?
I think World War II would probably be one of the most tumultuous times in her life, in the life of the royal family, as Britain was very directly threatened by a invading force. And that's really one of that's her coming of age, is during World War II. So I think she is very much used to that, almost. And with each decade, there are new ideas and different political and social changes going on. And I think if you look at it, each one would pose a new idea, a new challenge to the monarchy. But I think one of the reasons why Queen Elizabeth is so looked up to and admired is because she's a little bit above it all, but also in the mix of it, to where she has attempted to remain relevant. And to quote someone else, that she was an anchor for the age, because she's been there all the time. She's always been there. She's a very constant presence, kind of the mascot of Great Britain. And I think there are always different challenges posed to the monarchy. They seem to have always survived, and one of the monarchy's main interests is preserving the monarchy. So she has done that for sure, and expanded the role of the monarchy to different charitable interests, and still maintaining some level of political activeness, whether or not she doesn't vote and she doesn't take part in political discussions, but she does open parliament. She asks the prime minister to form a government in her name, and she has meetings with the prime minister in which I am sure she does give her opinion then.
And we're wondering, in what ways has her legacy changed the idea of a monarchy? What were some differences between Elizabeth II's reign and perhaps her predecessors?
I think she I think is really interesting as she almost picks up where Victoria left off, another very long reigning female monarch in British history, and where there is a great change within the monarchy because, well, they're on the throne for a very long time. So as the world changes, the idea of what a monarch is, of what a monarch does, also changes. And most monarchs don't really have to deal with that long continuation of almost a century of being on the throne or being in the public eye. But I think one of the things that Elizabeth has done is very much, of course, there was the process of decolonization, the creation of the Commonwealth, and that she's the head of the Commonwealth. And I think one of the legacies that she has is going to be the Commonwealth of Nations, this more equitable form of nations that she heads, and that really kind of developed under her. It existed, it began to exist under her predecessor, but I think that that's really something that is more closely related to her reign. She also has, I think, very much expanded the charitable interests of the monarchy, to include patrons of the arts and different charitable causes throughout the monarchy, and to not necessarily champion political causes, but to champion different social causes. One of the things that her grandchildren, Prince William and Prince Harry, are both very passionate about is mental health. And to speak about mental health and the social impacts of that is something that they are very vocal about. And I see that as being something that Queen Elizabeth kind of put into play, of being more vocal about social causes, that her grandchildren have then become even more vocal about. So I think that's one of the ways that the legacy of Queen Elizabeth is already in play with her family, with her grandchildren, and even her great-grandchildren. I'm interested to see what comes next. So thank you so much for joining us. Please do not forget about our raffle. You can find the link below. Thank you so much for coming and talking just a little bit about the enormous life and impact of Queen Elizabeth II. Until next time, stay safe and take care.